oxalic acid is a huge one. And arabinose is a test for yeast is very important with that. Stool analysis can give lots of valuable information. And yes, genetics plays a big role. So, I call that CBS transsulfuration pathway for getting rid of estrogen metabolites the dream pathway, and I call the COMT the God gene. And then the NTHFR, if you wish, you can call that perhaps the happy gene, because if you don't have enough methylfolate, you're going to have much higher propensity to being depressed. And those three have a commonality. And that commonality is those are all pathways to get rid of not only toxins, but to get rid of estrogen. But those also are pathways that are associated with overstimulation. In the case of COMT, it's associated with not being able to metabolize adrenaline.
Welcome to the TooCuriousMD podcast. I'm Dr. Alya Ahmad.
And I'm Dr. Alya Ahmad.
In this podcast, we are asking the unasked questions.
We're physicians applying the lens of narrative medicine, exploring integrative practices and psychedelic treatment in healthcare.
Together with our guests, we weave new learnings from stories, expertise, and the sciences. With the wisdom from holistic, alternative, and these conventional medicine, we are here to challenge the status quo.
We're curious about the connectivity and complexity between diverse fields of knowledge as they relate to consciousness, chronic illness, mental health, resilience, and beyond.
Learning more about the art and science of healing, or listening to stories of extraordinary healing. You're in the right place. Let's dive in. I also want to reflect back on intention. I think James Doherty, if you've heard of him, wrote a book on magic, mind magic. It's a neuroscience of manifestation and how manifestation, which has been dismissed in healthcare practices as kind of materialistic, kind of pseudoscience. But he's a neurosurgeon and a neuroscientist, and he really speaks to how manifestation introduces us to different possibilities, and it lays the groundwork of how we can change our brain structures with manifestation, with intention, attention, meditation, visualization, and even compassion has a physiological effect on the neurochemistry and the architectural activities in the brain and in the nervous system. So for the audience, again, I'll post the details of James Boyd's work in the show notes. I'm curious to hear more about your daily practice, I guess, of intention, and how do you feel one maintains that intention through the day, through the practice of our daily work as we get distracted or pulled away from, or
well, first of all, it's crucial to set the tone right at the beginning of the day. I think that is vital. So, for example, I will start my day. First, I keep a dream journal, and I record dreams that I remember from the night before. Incidentally, if you're not dreaming most nights, that's a functional vitamin B6 deficiency. That transsulfuration pathway from homocysteine down to glutathione is not working very well because you've had too many oxalates, for example, from Roundup, or you have yeast issues and aldehydes from that compete with oxalates, but it burns through the available vitamin B6. That's a pathway that generates CoQ10 and taurine, two important nutrients. But that glutathione, that's the end product, helps get rid of toxins, helps get rid of estrogen metabolites. And having enough B6 is important for converting glutamate and excitotoxin to calming, relaxing GABA. So I did want to mention that. I call that the dream pathway with that. But after I write down my dreams, then I go outside. I have a cemetery behind my house, so no fumes, no exhaust to worry about. And so I do high intensity interval training where for 30 seconds I sprint, and then for 90 seconds I will either walk or a slow jog. And during the 90-second periods of time, I'll do 8 rounds of that. I will share mantras, and the first mantra is, I will live until X number of years of age with a sound mind and a strong body. My biostat's a healthy 33 years old. I'm labeled as 72 years old right now, but I tell myself I'm really 33 years old. Every day in every way, I'm increasing my physical and mental capacity. I set that out to the universe, right? The second thing I say is spirituality is the pursuit of holiness. Wipe away the cobwebs of fear, selfishness. And then also a third thing I would say is this is the most beautiful place in the world, right here in Midway, Kentucky. And a fourth thing is the more I own, the more it owns me. Okay, that's something the monks say. And then the fifth thing is that I greet my predeceased parents and predeceased siblings and predeceased grandparents. Just give them a greeting. My in-laws, which I was very close to as well, and other special cousins, I greet. And then the next time am I trusting in God? And I think that's an important question to ask every day. Am I trusting in the Creator? Because if you are, then again, there's nothing to worry about. So that reminder sets that tone. No need to be worried or concerned. Trust in God. And then am I allowing my spirit to shine through? Am I reflecting God, which is love? This is the day the Lord hath made. Rejoice and be glad in, right? And that last statement, this is the day the Lord hath made. Be glad and rejoice, and I shout that out. And so for me, that sets a positive tone for the day and carries forward. But it's very easy if you start on a negative tone. For example, if you criticize your spouse at the start of the morning, that's going to stay with you the rest of the day, I think, that negative tone. And so you've got to protect against that.
Yeah. I can see even how the intention, you're actually directing your brain to prioritize, neuronal pathways, which again, those pathways, whether they're involved in the dopamine pathways, often associated again with reward and motivation, reinforcing positive intentions can create this impetus towards a positive goal. The serotonin system, where the feelings of well-being, maintaining, noticing our well-being, noticing our environment, that the setting, our prefrontal cortex, which is involved in decision making and planning, and and maintaining with those intentions, with that visualization, those positive affirmations that you described, those mantras of acceptance and of what you own will own you. I love that. I think that's something we can easily forget, or easily just become consumed with what we own, right? What do we own, and what do we really need? And that mindfulness practice, with the full force that going outside, even with that light that brings into the visual cortex and to vitamin D pathways, and methylation. You described the methylation system, dreaming, the recognition that what can we do in terms of our nutritional health, because that's again some things that we as doctors see more, I see more and more of, I'm sure you do too. Our nutritional health lifestyle is really what's creating this pandemic of mental health disparities, mental health really that become much more treatment resistant, and the importance of nutritional balance, which is the word balance, because it's not just one type of nutrition, it's a balance of nutrition that again helps rebuild and regenerate. But what's missing in our diet? What do you feel is really missing in our lifestyle that pulls us away from this type of way of thinking that you described?
Well, one thing is we're missing minerals. And for example, lithium, Ashland, Oregon has the highest amount of lithium in the water. When I visited Ashland, Oregon, the first 2 weeks I was there, I never did see a police car the whole time. But there are areas of Texas where there's no lithium in the water and minerals are deficient, and violence and hostility are associated with mineral deficiencies. So eating these processed foods does promote violence, does promote criminality. And if we could just, even take the lithium and minerals around to all the jails and prisons, we could get much more balanced individuals in association with that.
So minerals, and would you say it was criminality, or would you say it cortisol, or the regulation of the nervous system in utero? I see a lot of we talk about ACEs, right? Adverse childhood experiences, and the effect that that has on the brain of the fetal brain, even before it's born. It's been exposed to trauma, and the effect of that has on the nervous system.
Let me explain a mechanism associated with that. First of all, when you eat processed foods, you're getting chemicals or preservatives with that. And where do those chemicals and preservatives get processed? They're processed in the liver, which also processes estrogen. So essentially, all preservatives are chemicals, heavy metals, mercury, they're all estrogenic in their effects. So if you have trauma, if a pregnant woman is exposed to trauma, what happens? As you mentioned, her cortisol levels go up. And what happens to her intestinal lining? That becomes weakened by the higher cortisol levels. And that develops what we're familiar with as leaky gut or increased intestinal permeability. And so the bacteria in our intestinal tract are like cats and dogs. They eat food and they excrete toxins, and those pass out the bottom. But with increased permeability, those toxins are absorbed into our bloodstream. They're lipophilic. They go to the brain. They go to the nerve sheaths. They go to the breasts. We don't want those in those areas. And then we have to detox those out of the body. But once again, all of those are generally metabolized by the liver, which interferes with estrogen metabolism. So stress is estrogenic. We already, 80% of the population, in my opinion now, is estrogen dominant, excess estrogen, and that's generally tied in with low free or available testosterone associated with that. So excess estrogen, first of all, you mentioned methylation, and this all connects in. The COMT gene mutation of valve file 158 is associated where you don't metabolize dopamine, norepinephrine, epinephrine. Half of us are at least heterozygous. You and I are at least heterozygous, right? Because it's associated with a good on switch, but not a good off switch. So you and I, we always like to keep busy doing things, right? We're detail people. We cross the T's, we dot the I's, we're workaholic. We always have more projects going on at night, and our brains are spinning, and we'll have difficulty sleeping unless we exercise until exhaustion associated with that. I call that the God gene, the COMT, the God gene, because these individuals also are very caring. We give and give and give, don't feel appreciated, can have any resentment tied in with that. We're empaths. We get around negative energy. We absorb that negative energy inappropriately. And we're more intuitive and have a greater capacity to connect into higher power. So these are the individuals that have the spiritual stories. These are the ones that are more likely to have had spiritual near-death experiences. So that's a gift to be intuitive, to have that divine connection, but it comes with the baggage of being in fight or flight. And if you're homozygous, if you have two mutations on that COMT gene, you're in fight or flight every single day, your whole life. You don't know what peacefulness is. And because ethically you're not able to get rid of estrogen as readily in females, that can attract negative energy. If they experience negative energy, their adrenaline kicks in, and guess what? They can't process it. That's PTSD. And so the other characteristics with this is these are the highly sensitive individuals. They're sensitive to foods, sensitive to chemicals, maybe to light, to noise, to electromagnetic fields, to mold. They get more of a reaction. If they get a tick bite, they're more apt to get Lyme issues. And estrogen in excess is associated with female issues, fibrocystic breasts, ovarian cysts, associated with that, premenstrual symptoms, anxiety, panic, obsessiveness, phobia, sleep disturbance, irritability, carbohydrate craving, swelling, breast soreness, tenderness, migraines, heavier periods, cramping, bloating, brain fog, aches and pains in joints and muscles. I have patients that will come in with 25 or 30 separate symptoms, and I point out to them, the women, every one of those symptoms is better the week after your period. Every one of those symptoms is worse the week before your period, because if you're stressed and you don't ovulate, you don't produce the neutralizing progesterone that's calming, relaxing, to help neutralize or stimulating estrogen. And that high estrogen results in the liver producing sex hormone binding globulin, which binds up the excess estrogen to reduce it to that amount in the bloodstream, but it binds up your testosterone, reducing available testosterone. So most of these women have low libidos tied in with low testosterone. Testosterone gives courage, confidence, motivation. Testosterone and area organ tissue, and testosterone anti-autoimmune. Estrogen promotes autoimmune. Testosterone dampens autoimmune. We know in lupus, right? Lupus, but it turns out in all autoimmune conditions, estrogen makes it worse. Testosterone, though it strengthens the immune system, dampens autoimmune activity, which is why vitamin D helps all autoimmune conditions, why zinc and turmeric and all of these other nutrients I mentioned help with autoimmune scenarios.
Yeah. I think if you're familiar with the work of Dr. Felice Gersh, where she talks about estrogen and the importance of estrogen to be seen not just as estrogen by itself, estrogen, but the whole family of estrogen, right? All metabolites of estrogen and that cycle that has to happen of estrogen. And of course, the estrogenic or inflammatory estrogens is not estradiol, it is estrone. And I think one of your talks, you were talking about prostate cancer, and in men, when they have inflammation, their estrone levels are higher, and that itself increases the growth of the prostate, which makes it a very inflammatory response to stress. And I think you spoke about this, and how just treating stress itself can again reduce inflammation in the prostate, but even addressing it, looking at even estrogen in males, why that's important to really dissect out the types of estrogen that may be occurring, especially in our environment now where we have a lot of endocrine disruptors. We have a lot of artificial estrogens that we're ingesting, inhaling, and applying in our bodies.
Those are estrogenic because they're metabolized by the liver, interfering with estrogen. I think, to my mind, that's the easy way to understand that.
Right, the clearance of estrogen through the conjugation system in the gut.
And I like to do an estrone sulfate level. Estrone levels by themselves I don't find very helpful, but the estrone sulfate, like DHEA sulfate, is the stored form of the most aggressive estrogen. And yeah, I do that in most of my cancer patients, but I've learned to use it as a screening tool in women. And if I see that estrone sulfate disproportionate to estradiol, the normal ratio should be about 2 to 1 or less. But if it's 3 to 1 or 4 to 1, I had a woman come to me, a young woman, she had severe psoriasis. She'd been to Cleveland Clinic and said, "Hi, Dr. Roach. I went to Cleveland Clinic. I saw all these doctors. Nobody could help me with my psoriasis, with my autoimmune issues. Is there estrogen high or is there testosterone high? Obviously her estrogen's sky high with that high-pitched voice. And I checked her estrone sulfate level. The normal is up to 390. And the highest I've seen was 1,000. And this woman, it was 5,000, right? And their testosterone was in the basement. So I used strategies to bring estrogen down, to bring testosterone up, and her psoriasis melted away, and her autoimmune conditions largely resolved.
So what would you, for our audience, again, we have a mixed audience of clinicians, providers, doctors, healers. What would be and in your training, because I see that you're almost triple board certified in family medicine, integrative medicine, and holistic medicine. What would be your treatment approach to a patient who comes in with, say, diabetes, or psoriasis? Do you evaluate all components of their health, meaning their body health, their mental health, their spiritual health, looking at kind of their lifestyle, functional? I mean, I know with patients, you can go as deep as looking at their genetic health or their genetic profile and seeing are they a carrier of COMT, do they have MTHFR, or all the other different SNPs that we can actually really treat and target it. What would be your treatment approach for a patient?
Well, first of all men with diabetes and all men with coronary disease have low testosterone. Okay, they all do. So automatically, I know out of the gate that they have insufficient testosterone. Testosterone reduces waist size, lowers blood sugar, lowers cholesterol, again, is anti-inflammatory, anti-autoimmune. So I know that's an issue. And of course, in fat cells, we convert testosterone to estrogen. So if they have a belly, then I especially know that they have high estrogen associated with that. So bringing estrogen down, bringing testosterone is a key aspect of management with those individuals. And with psoriasis, I mentioned the same thing: high estrogen, low free or available testosterone tied in with that. But yes, I like to do comprehensive assessment with blood work beyond the routine blood tests. I do like to look at heavy metal levels. I do check a range of the hormones like estrone sulfate and the free testosterone, as well as the total testosterone. With that, we look at organic acid levels whenever we can. You can get 76 different organics tested. For example, oxalic acid is a huge one. And arabinose is a test for yeast is very important with that. Stool analysis can give lots of valuable information. And yes, genetics plays a big role. So, I call that CBS transsulfuration pathway for getting rid of estrogen metabolites the dream pathway, and I call the COMT the God gene. And then THFR, if you wish, you can call that perhaps the happy gene, because if you don't have enough methylfolate, you're going to have much higher propensity to being depressed. And those three have a commonality. And that commonality is those are all pathways to get rid of not only toxins, but to get rid of estrogen. But those also are pathways that are associated with overstimulation. In the case of COMT, it's associated with not being able to metabolize adrenaline. In the case of the CBS transsulfuration dream pathway, it's that you aren't, you're depleting vitamin B6 and can't convert glutamate and excitotoxin into calming, relaxing GABA. And as far as the methylation pathway, which is taking homocysteine and folate and B12, help convert that to methionine and onto S-adenosyl methionine, which goes 10 important directions, including the glutathione, which is like Velcro attaching heavy metals and chemicals, and once again, estrogen metabolites. So methylation gets rid of estrogen metabolites. If you have an MTHFR gene mutation, you're going to be estrogen dominant, right? If you have B12 deficiency, you're going to be estrogen dominant tied with that. But SAMe, S-adenosyl methionine, does what else? Go back to the COMT pathway. SAMe metabolizes adrenaline in the COMT pathway, right? So it's relaxing. It's also the fastest acting antidepressant. Within 2 or 3 days, it gets and for 85% of my patients, it gets their mood in a better place. So all three of those pathways are associated with being estrogen dominant and being overstimulated when that's not working. Really, if you look at the whole world these days, with knowing that 80% are estrogen dominant because of BPA and plastic water bottles, because so many of us have excess fat cells converting testosterone to estrogen, because we eat processed foods, that means we all are more anxious and fearful associated with that, but also we're maybe more intuitive, hopefully, and have a greater capacity to connect in spiritually. Is what I'm hoping along with that. So the one key is to bring those hormones in balance with those scenarios. And the other key, as you know thoroughly, is we've got to fix that nutritional, digestive, intestinal pathway. So 95% of my patients are sensitive to cow milk products. And nearly all of us have gluten issues these days as well. So ideally, I do food sensitivity testing to identify which foods are most problematic. We all have these food sensitivities. It's just a matter of figuring out which ones, but it's almost always cow's milk products. And I try to substitute goat yogurt, for example, in those scenarios. And then I try to get rid of all gluten, and maybe you can tolerate some rice, maybe organic corn, or things that you may be able to manage. But pineapple can be an issue, and there are other foods. So eliminating foods you're sensitive to, number one, for a while. Later on, you can address those food sensitivities. You never fix gluten, I don't think, but you can fix the others to some extent. So I would have them leave those off for a month. Number two is go to the grocery on a full stomach, shop the perimeter, avoid anything with ingredients. If it gets in your house, it gets eaten. You've got to keep that out of your living space. That's crucial. Number three, remember quantum science. Bless your food. If you're sending love to the food you're getting ready to eat, guess what? It's going to be more nourishing for you. Along with that, chew your food until it's a liquid. And then bitters, and that can be ginger or apple cider vinegar, or the best one of all is probably black cumin seed oil, right? A wealth of research and benefits associated with black cumin seed oil. That was in King Tut's tomb. It was mentioned in the Bible. It's in Joshua, for example. And then digestive enzymes. And most individuals with autoimmune issues have acid deficiency. Most individuals with cancer have acid deficiency, which means we're not breaking down those food proteins into harmless amino acids, which is really the goal. We're not freeing up nutrients for absorption associated with that. And we're not killing off bacteria trying to crawl up our intestine, leading to small intestinal bacterial overgrowth associated with that. And then probiotic is helpful. And then identifying any pathogens, parasites or yeast overgrowth in the intestinal tract. Yeast love sugar. So whenever you want to grow yeast, just eat sugar, processed foods that convert into that. But when you have yeast on board, which a lot of us do, and as you know, in autistic children, which both of us are particularly familiar with, right, 80% of those children have yeast issues. 80%, which means that's aggravating their intestinal permeability and adding to the toxin overload that they have. So it's really crucial. And 10% of them have Clostridia issues. They're the kids that beat up on their parents because Clostridia leads to an excess of dopamine, and that leads to violence when you get too much of it. So all of
Yes.
that assessment is very helpful.
I was particularly fascinated to hear that when that talk on Clostridia and autism, the dots connected because I could recall hundreds of patients because I ran a chronic complex care clinic, and they would be readmitted or they would have antibiotic courses, and then we were treating Clostridia, and then we were doing fecal transplants, and we couldn't get rid of the Clostridia, and the behaviors were worse. There was this aggression that was more notable post-infection or post during the courses of their treatment. But the dots connected, and I was like, oh my God, I didn't make that connection to Clostridia and to the effect that it has on the gut biome and the axis or the gut biome axis and that effect it has on the brain and the nervous system. Fascinating. And
the children with yeast, the autistic kids with yeast issues you can identify them because they act drunk, right? They act giddy because they are in fact drunk because yeast, alcohol is a metabolite of yeast, right? So yes, they have too much alcohol. So that's how you can tell if they have yeast overgrowth is behavior.
For a patient, what you described sounds very complex. It sounds like, well, it sounds overwhelming. It sounds like, well, it's hormonal, it's my lifestyle, it's what I'm eating, it's how I'm, working, what I'm doing in my day-to-day, what I'm not doing in terms of my spiritual health. How would you approach this treatment plan, say, with a patient in that first visit? What would that look like?
Obviously, nutrition is huge. And so addressing nutrition is key. Whole food, plant-based, organic, diverse, fresh foods, that's key. You can't fix everything else if they're not doing nutrition. It's not likely to work very effectively. And then yes, you do address lifestyle in terms of physical activity. I encourage all of my patients to do an hour of physical activity, like 30 minutes in the morning, as I do, particularly if you can do, the high intensity interval training. Now, if you have angina, be careful, build up gradually with that. And then I walk in the evening with my wife. You need to talk with your spouse every day. You might as well walk and talk rather than just sit and talk with that, right? So physical activity important. Getting a good night's sleep is huge. If you're tired or not rested, almost nothing else is going to work. So getting to bed on time. And I had spiritual experiences. My mother came to me in a dream one night and said, "You're getting to bed too late." And I was going to bed at 11. So I switched and went to bed at 10:30. And after a few nights, she came again and said, "You're still getting to bed too late." So now I go to bed at 10 o'clock at night. And that way I get a full night's rest and am able to focus effectively. So there are a lot of strategies to promote sleep health. Switching gears that last hour before bedtime helps. Staying physically active gets rid of adrenaline in a healthy way so that you're more relaxed and tired when evening comes associated with that. And then having a spiritual practice in place, setting those intentions as we talked about. And I now meditate that last half an hour before bedtime. And that's how I switch with that. I do something called sacred acoustics, which was associated with Eben Alexander's wife now. Karen Alexander had developed that. And so I do a half an hour meditation, and that's maybe my favorite time of day because it's me time where I get to focus and I just empty my brain. And when you empty your brain, that allows things to come to the surface, more important things come to the surface, and it allows you to open up and potentially, channel, from higher entities information as well. I mentioned channeling because there are times, I don't know if this happens to you, but when I'm speaking to patients and I'm saying to myself while I'm speaking, where do those words come from? It's like I'm observing myself speaking while I'm saying the words. So I just think that so much of that is coming through from a higher source, just passing through me, associated with that. I do think supplements are key. Each botanical has hundreds, if not thousands, of beneficial nutrients. And so for me, whereas 5 vegetables a day is nice, what if I could have 100 vegetables a day, right? So most days I take 100 different supplement pills. I take as many different botanicals as I can. And people say, well, yeah, I do, focusing on all of this does take time. It probably takes an hour and a half a day. But I'm going to be 73 next month, and hopefully I don't look 73. I'm in generally good health. Don't have any serious medical issues, so it's working for me so far doing this. But I think all of that, being that whole package is important. But connecting in, am I trusting in the Creator? Right. In other words, am I eliminating fear? Am I focused on love? Am I focused on maybe making your next patient when you see your best friend? Act like they're your best friend when you see them. And you can really connect, and they're going to listen much more closely when you perceive them that way. They sense how the love that you're giving them and the intention you're giving them.
It's true. Very true. Wonderful, wonderful work that you're doing, Dr. Roach, and such a privilege and such an honor to be talking with you today. I think I'd like to just close with points or thoughts on what's next for conventional medicine. What do you feel can happen? Because both of us are kind of, a lot of providers now are burned out.
And appropriately burned out because they're not practicing the healthcare that we should be practicing. And it's not mostly their own faults, but it's the way we've been trained in medical school and the continuing education that we receive. We're taught pharmaceutical medicine. We're not taught healing. And yes, we're going to get burned out when we do that because that's not what we're supposed to be doing. That's not what we're supposed to be teaching. And we're at a very exciting time. And it's my opinion, we're at the greatest moment of evolution of humankind, because we're having this awakening to, through ketamine and similar experiences, to the reality of the Creator, the reality of the universe that is out there. But as far as healthcare is concerned, there's a tremendous opportunity that has developed. I've setting politics aside, I've been monitoring Robert F. Kennedy Jr.'s Children Health Defense website for 2 or 3 years. And you may have your own opinions about Mr. Kennedy, but he does more pull-ups than I've been able to do my whole life, right? Because he, in his time, 1960s, when I was growing up, John F. Kennedy emphasized physical activity. He was the one that got physical education started in schools, right? And so Mr. Kennedy likewise is going to emphasize in his role with the government about physical health. He's going to force reexamination of the way we care for patients. He's going to insist on long-term research with vaccine studies. Instead of vaccines being studied against other vaccines, they should be studied against placebo. And instead of seeing their effects over 3 months or 6 months, what's their 5-year effect or 10-year effect? Because we're seeing an explosion in autoimmune issues. Back in the 1960s, when I was growing up, 6% of kids had a chronic health condition. Now 60%, 10 times as many, have a chronic health condition, right? And that's, all of the things we've been talking about are contributing to that. So there's going to be a complete reexamination of healthcare. So thank you so much for what you're doing.
Thank you. Thank you so much too. We'll be in touch and let you know when we'll release this out. Thank you so much. Yeah. Thanks for joining us on the TooCuriousMD podcast. We hope today's episode inspired you to ask new questions and explore fresh perspectives. We challenge you to ask us those unasked questions that you're curious about in your medical practice, condition, health, and wellness.
If you enjoyed the podcast, don't forget to subscribe, share it with somebody just as curious, and leave us a review. It helps us keep the curiosity alive. Post or comment with a question or curious inquiry that you have and seek to explore or learn with us. Stay curious, and we'll see you next time.